Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Books with Nate, and today I have a review for you of the 8th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, The Hounds by Steven Erikson. And just to start off, this is probably one of my favorites of the series so far. Yeah, it's incredibly divisive, or not divisive, but people drop the series around here, or they love it, and I was somebody who loved it. This book picks up after the events of really book 1 and 3, Gardens of the Moon and Memories of Ice, respectively. There's, of course, kind of a vague, overarching plot throughout the entire series, but this book doesn't really have a plot. I would say it's more of a story that's being told, and I think that can rub people the wrong way. So I'm going to kind of go in depth about this later, but I want to start off with non-spoilers, general thoughts, and then move on to spoilers and talking about events that occur and just getting more into detail about what happens. So, the Hounds is almost a tale of two cities, I would say. On one hand, we have Darujhistan. I called it Dragnipur a second ago. The city of blue fire, kind of filled with familiar faces from book 1 and some from book 3. And then we also have Black Coral. I believe it was just called Coral in Memories of Ice, but there the Tist Andi have sort of made themselves home, kind of, after the events of book 3. And in sort of both of these cities, we find kind of all these different groups of people that were following POVs, and they all kind of have their own little narrative going on, essentially. And then eventually, towards the end of the last book, last section, things start to kind of come together, finally. So it's a very slow build, and one that doesn't really make itself apparent for an overarching plot, but yeah, it's just a story of these individual stories, essentially. So in Darujhistan, we have the Phoenix Inn with faces like Krupp, I believe it's pronounced. I called it Kruppa forever. Murillo, Cutter, a few others. Gruntle is there, and yeah, just a few other faces. And, of course, the Thieves or Assassins Guild, that guy, the guy who's the alchemist Baruch, I believe is his name, and a few others. And then we also have the retired bridge burners from Memories of Ice, who have opened up Karul's bar, and they're essentially just trying to avoid being killed by a mysterious force. They're not sure who's trying to kill him, and it really pisses them off. And then we have Black Coral, where Tist Andi and Anamanda Rake are trying to kind of just navigate their own purpose there. And outside of the walls, there's been a burrow and or a barrow, I believe it's called, and sort of a temple dedicated to Ikovian, who was a major character in Memories of Ice, and sort of his ending scene with, compassion towards the Talani mass. So those are kind of the big overarching cities that we explore, but we also have some smaller stories with Namander Golit, I believe is his name, and kind of Clip, and all these kind of wandering Tist Andi who are trying to make their way back to Black Coral and Anamanda Rake. Then, of course, we have Karsa, Orlong, Samardev, and they meet up with someone called Traveler, and they're kind of doing their own thing. And, I thought all these kind of narrative choices were really well done. Just to kind of get into themes, let's get into themes. This book this review is going to kind of be all over the place, so bear with me. So this book is very thematically driven as well, and we see themes of kind of innocence lost, and also, I guess, the innocence of children. That's sort of a big theme in this book, especially following just people like Crocus / Cutter, Harlow, who's a child that we find out who he's the child of eventually. Guilt, Purpose with the Tist Andi and Anamanda Rake, and of course Gruntle is kind of in there as well. He's trying to kind of navigate his own position from Book 3, who he was formerly I believe the mortal sword of Trach, who is the god of war, but he doesn't really want that, and Trach or whatever has kind of disappeared as a god, essentially, and so he's trying to find his own purpose, and he doesn't really want to be that. There's also storytelling as a big theme, with Diker and Fisher Kaltath, who is a bard, and he's trying to navigate the retelling of the Chain of Dogs from Book 2. And he just doesn't really know how to tell it and say it. And it's a lot of, it's pain that he's feeling around this, because he doesn't know how to express his feelings around it. So more on that later. And then just really questioning of institutions, which has kind of been a theme throughout the series, but we get a bit more in depth with that, with some gods and sort of their own, like questioning of their purpose, and should they be answering to their own followers, and if they do, what does that mean, and the consequences of being a god, and religion and order, and sort of a strict following of these rules, like compassion, for example. Ikovian was, at the end, he pretty much said of Book 3 was like, compassion should be unbound. Compassion, you can't choose to give compassion to somebody based on what they do to you. It has to be given willingly at all times. So kind of exploring the consequences of that, I thought was really interesting. And I think what makes this book great, and what really makes Erikson a good writer in this, is, I think, focusing on storytelling, which is what this book was about. You just get all these bits of stories, and I just really enjoyed it a lot. It just kind of feels like this coming together of individual stories. In every other book we've kind of had stories of like armies or gods or forces coming together eventually, even after kind of a slow build, and that eventually kind of takes over the plot. But in this book, Erikson strips it down to these individual stories, and that's the focus. And I think it allows for these individual characters just to be explored with their feelings and their own, just their place in the world. It's not like the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, where it is very character driven, and each character is kind of working within the confines of the plot, which isn't good or bad, but that's just kind of a distinction, I think. Instead, we just see characters exploring their relationships with one another or with themselves, and like I said before, their place in the world. I just kind of wrap up my non-spoiler thoughts. I know this has gone on for longer than what I wanted, but this book never, in the series, really has never felt grimdark. People put that label on it because there's some dark stuff that happens, and very violent, bloody. It can seem grimdark, but I think there is always a message around hope, and I just think these characters end up in really shitty situations, and it's never direct towards like, we need to fight for the sake of being good. I just think someone's trying to make things better, either for the people around them or just better, just to keep living, and it just feels like a fight for humanity and empathy, and I think that's always been the message of this series. So if people call it grimdark, I can see why, but I don't think it's ever an outlook of, the world's shitty, so I need to be shitty in order to succeed, like Game of Thrones. Not digging at that. I'm just saying that's sort of the outlook it has, and I don't think Malazan ever says that. This is one of my favorites. Just to kind of wrap up non-spoiler thoughts, this is one of my favorites of the series so far. It's an easy 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, whatever. I love this book, and it's great. So now to go on to spoilers, I just want to talk about Darujhistan for a bit. We have Krepa, who's kind of this omnipresent or directly present narrator throughout the book, or mostly just in Darujhistan. And I really enjoyed having him be that kind of narrator for Darujhistan because I just got a sense of nostalgia when reading the especially at the beginning when exploring Darujhistan, because we haven't really seen it too much since book one, Gardens of the Moon. That's where I started my journey 2 years ago, and as everybody else does, obviously. So I just really, it felt like at home almost, and we pick up with people like Murillo, and Ralik Nam comes back from the Azath house from the end of book one, and Crocus shows up, or Cutter, and it's just kind of like this coming together of family again, and I think I just really enjoyed that aspect of it. Yeah, I just love being in this city, which I didn't, I think in Gardens of the Moon, I just didn't really have the mental capacity to really appreciate what I was reading at the time, because I know a lot of people actually love Gardens of the Moon, but I think at the time I didn't really, I liked it. I just didn't really, it didn't rank super highly for me looking back on it. So reading this book and kind of being with Krepa in this way made me want to just revisit Gardens of the Moon and really look forward to a reread, because there's a lot of stuff from that book that kind of makes its way into this book, either directly or indirectly. And just to talk on Cutter, or Crocus Younghand, I was listening to a podcast, the 10 Very Big Books, and they had an interview with Steven Erikson on this book, and I didn't really realize it, but Crocus and Murillo essentially kind of had the same journey. Murillo was kind of this player who was a good swordsman and was sleeping with the nobility and everything like that. And then Crocus comes back and kind of does the same thing. And he, of course, gets revenge for his friend Murillo, which I felt that when Murillo died, trying to save Harlow. That was just because you could see that Murillo kind of in this book, he was kind of teetering on like, I'm older now, I don't really know what to do. It's like I'm not as good as I once was. And then he was trying to help somebody he loved, Stony Manakis. And so that was kind of heartbreaking in a way, because he loved someone and he was, kind of at the end of his own journey, and he died trying to do the right thing. That was heartbreaking, but it was also cool to see Crocus kill that douchebag. I forget his name, but yeah, I fucking hated that guy. So that was good to see. Trying to get through everyone in Darujhistan. We have Lady Envy, of course, just getting up to some BS in Darujhistan. And I'm confused if it was Vorkin, I believe her name is, or Lady Envy, who had that estate where Torvald Nam and that crew kind of guarded. I think it was Envy, because there were the Segula there. So I'm just going to go with that. Torvald Nam's whole storyline was cool. Or it was just funny, rather. And it was good to kind of get sort of this is kind of what I was going about earlier, just kind of getting this very human journey of it. It wasn't really towards the end that we see him do big things, but, it's just like a guy who went through a lot of shit, and then he comes back home, and his wife is like, where the hell have you been? And then they're actually just, they have that kind of relationship, and they really love each other. And that was just kind of nice to read. Then we have Cruel's Bar, and I was sad to see Mallet die just because of what he meant to some of the other characters. I didn't really, remember him too much as an individual from books 1 and 3, but it's still heartbreaking in its own way to see how that person affects other characters. There was, of course, Duiker, who I mentioned earlier, trying to retell The Chain of Dogs, or Diker, I don't remember how to pronounce his name. I appreciated what Fisher Kalatath was trying to do, and I just felt like him trying to help him retell the story, it's painful for him to try and tell this, and he doesn't know how to say it perfectly, and he's trying to approach it like a historian, versus somebody who writes poetry, or somebody who writes their own stories and sings, and trying to kind of heal Duiker in this way, and it wasn't a big plot or a big story, but it was noticeable, and I think I just really enjoyed seeing sort of how they work together. And of course, Duiker with Scalara, she was trying to kind of help him, and she kind of attached herself to him, not in a romantic way, but just kind of trying to help this older man just sort of not be depressed, trying to just help him get through what he was going through. And I enjoyed that a lot. Then we have Berthal and Char, and I didn't really, I understood the I liked it. There was just so many stories and people in this book and POVs that it's kind of hard to really navigate every single one emotionally, but I know that Berthal really cares for Char, and sort of what happens to Char, really going through a lot of shit. I appreciated that, and really Berthal trying to look out for him. And I think Berthal at the end ends up getting with Scalara finally. Yeah, there's a lot of people in Darujhistan. And I'm going to get to the final book at the end. I want to go to Black Coral first. So let's do that. So Animator Rake, we have him trying to find purpose for his people. He's kind of recounting, or just looking back on his life. He's been around for, I think, hundreds of thousands of years. He's done a lot of crap, and now he's here, and he's talking to Endis Salon and the other two guys, Tistandi, and what ends up happening to him at the end, just kind of looking back on it, I was like, oh wow, like this is a character that I cared about in books 1 and 3. I just found him interesting and kind of mysterious, and you could tell that he was a presence on the page from the start, and sort of just him trying to talk to these people to help set them up for the future success, ideally, of his people, because the Tistandi, from what I understand, they can't, their souls go nowhere when they die. They just die, and they're kind of in purgatory, essentially, I believe, and it's just kind of like this constant suffering, and in its own way, suffering, because they don't have a home. Kurald Galain has disappeared, but turns out it was actually in Dragnipur the whole time, in the wagon, I believe. And so, their god has abandoned them. They don't know where to go. They have no home. And so they ended up at Black Coral. And, people don't like them. Surprise. And we sort of explore those two people, Monkrat and Rithadal or something like that. And they're kind of trying to get back at the Tistandi while corrupting Itkovian's temple, essentially, and all of his followers into following the dying god. So I'll talk about Itkovian first. The consequences of being compassionate towards everyone. You know, I think that was a big theme for Kovian. That's something I've challenged myself with ever since I read Memories of Ice was, you know, being compassionate towards everyone and everything, no matter what. And because, especially nowadays, with everything going on in the world, I think it's just hard to be, you know, it's a question that's asked is, you know, should we be compassionate towards this? And it's something I struggle with. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I just think it's like an interesting question to pose. And yeah, especially with the quote from book 2, with, you know, the children are dying quote. Yeah, it's just, it hits home, and it's heavy, and it's a lot of anger is pent up around certain things that are happening, and yeah, it's just something that I think Malazan does a good job of exploring and questioning. Ultimately, it doesn't necessarily give you an answer; it just bids you to question, and yeah, that's something I really enjoyed, and just found thought-provoking in its own way. So Ikovian is, of course, dealing with the consequences of accepting everyone into his following. I know he doesn't really have a choice, but yeah, people are trying to... around it, it talks about, you know, how there's fundamentalists and all this other stuff, and once you kind of get into that, it muddies the water of what compassion is and what empathy is with Ikovian. And yeah, it kind of fucks him over in the end, essentially. And I don't think Erikson is saying that's how it should be, or that's, you know, the way of the world, and too bad, sorry, good luck kind of way. But it just explores that a bit more, and we see his followers get corrupted by this liquid from the dying god, essentially. And Seer Domin is, I think, kind of killed, but he's sent into the realm with Kovian, and they're, you know, there's that woman that the one guy loves, who's there, who's been taken by this dying god, essentially, and they're, you know, now in a fight with each other. And so that was kind of an interesting struggle. I want to talk more about that, but I don't want to go on forever. So we have Nimander, Gillet, and Clip, and that gang. I thought that was a really interesting read, because Nimander essentially becomes Animator Rake towards the end. Yeah, I just really liked his journeying. I don't like Clip at all. I didn't like him in book 7. So yeah, I'm just happy that... I don't even know what happened to Clip at the end. I don't really remember off the top of my head. I think he was killed, right? Because that priest, Testandi priest, kind of deals with him, I think, or something, or I don't remember. But I want to talk about Calor, too. I feel like I'm going on and on and on, but I don't know how to feel about this, but I really enjoyed his sections. He's a piece of shit, but I just getting more details on who he is, because he's kind of this, again, like, mysterious character in book 3 who's been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and he's done all this horrible fucking shit and built empires and killed hundreds of thousands of people. But you kind of explore more of him, and you get more into the purpose and how he's kind of been subjected to suffering in its own way, and it's hard for him to die, and yeah, and he just kind of eventually goes on this mission to just destroy everything, institutions, ideas, and just destroying the throne, essentially, and what that means for him. So I just really enjoyed reading those sections. And then just to kind of go a little bit more detail about plot with him, he interacts with that Elaint, the Tist Eater dragon, and pretty much I think they both come to the conclusion, or they talk about, one of them talks about how the Talani Mass have kind of been the bad guys all along, which is suggested periodically throughout the series, but yeah, and the Jagut have actually been the good guys, besides these tyrants. Trying to protect realms, trying to protect peoples, and because like every time you interact with a Jagut in this series, besides the first book, who is a tyrant, they don't seem bad, and they're kind of weird. They're kind of do their own thing. There was, of course, the one who puts a curse on the town in this book, but it's just kind of like they're kind of just doing their own thing, and they were genocided. People, the Talani Mass, try to get rid of them essentially because of the risk of these tyrants. Again, what's going on right now? It's just interesting. I don't know. It's just really interesting, and yeah, I just love getting kind of that questioning of what we've been thinking all along throughout the series. Like, oh, actually, there's this other side to it. We're in the present, but there's a history to this all. So now I just kind of want to get to the last section. Essentially, we have this convergence of the Hounds of Shadow and the Hounds of Light who come through in Darujhistan. Of course, Lady Envy and Lady Spite are fighting with each other, and it's setting off all the gas and stuff like that. So you have all this explosion, going everywhere, and the Hounds of Shadow show up and are fucking shit up because they're looking for Hood or Rake. I don't remember which one. And just speaking about Hood, I really enjoyed Hood's introduction and how he came into this story. I was surprised because when he came in, we get this scene with the Trigali Trade Guild in chapter 16 or so, where they're in this realm, and we just see this massive army of the dead coming through, and there's this undead dragon, the Elaint Tist Eater. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? And I'm like, what has Hood been up to this whole time? And I was like, shit, I gotta reread all these sections now, because I'm like, I did not fully register what was going on. Just this army of the dead coming to Dragnipur, essentially, or eventually, after Rake chops off the head of Hood and kills Hood, and he's sent into Dragnipur. And it seems like they had kind of been planning this the whole time, and they bring in the army of the dead into Dragnipur to fight against Chaos, and because Chaos is coming for this realm, Kurlal Galain, I believe, because it's been stored in this wagon in Dragnipur. And we get a scene with Hood and Draconis in Dragnipur, and Hood essentially says, there's no longer a god of the dead, and now all the other gods have to answer to their followers, because what happened was everybody was dying, just naturally or through war or what have you, and they all went to Hood, essentially, and they weren't going to their gods that they followed. And we get this kind of explored in book 6 with the guy without the hands, I forget his name right now, and all these people in the Jade are trying to get to their gods, and they're like, well, I can't, they're like trying to get answers and they can't, and then this guy eventually does answer them, but Hood is kind of like, yeah, this has to happen in order for us to believe in our institutions. He doesn't say that exactly, but that's kind of the theme, as these institutions don't answer to the people that follow them, and it's their responsibility and their duty to do that, and that's not what's happening. And it's kind of this critique of institutions and what they mean, and are these institutions right, and are the people at the head of them right? And I just think it's a neat little snippet, and kind of this theme throughout the books of gods and how we put up institutions, how we put up gods, and they're only so solid as we believe them to be. So that was kind of an interesting discussion between Draconis and Hood. I thought Dragonpour is a really weird thing with all these dead people, and I didn't really understand what was going on in there. Honestly, it was kind of confusing towards the end, but we see Whiskey Jack, who is Iskar Jarek. So, yeah, that was kind of suggested in book 6, I think, or book 7, when Karsa meets up with these people in 7 cities. So yeah, that was kind of cool. I was like, oh, okay. I kind of was maybe a little bit spoiled for me, but just kind of have that confirmed is cool. And we see Ricalian, one of the Grey Swords, there in the Army of the Dead. Yeah, and then Tok the Younger's there, and he's a herald now. So a lot of stuff kind of just happens in this last section, and it was really cool. And just kind of a lot of little snippets from the previous books are kind of popping up here. So just bear with me. But yeah, that whole, when Animatoric died, he eventually comes to Dragonpour because he's killed by Dragonpour because Traveler kills him incidentally somehow, by hitting the sword off of his thing with the sword that he previously had, vengeance or grief. I can just go on and on with this book. But when Rake died, I gasped and I got teary-eyed because I was really surprised that happened. And just after kind of everything that had been happening in this book, it hit me personally. So yeah, that was all crazy. Karsa, Traveler, Samardev, I'm glad we could kind of get an outside perspective of Karsa Orlong and not really get too much of him. I really enjoy his character, but I feel like having too much of him would have just been kind of a lot. In sort of the themes of this book, I really enjoyed what he did in this book and how he's kind of going on this mission to destroy everything in a way, to free his people and kind of just bring it all down. And sort of, I don't know, he just questions a lot, and he doesn't believe, he's stubborn, he's all this other stuff, but just kind of what he did with that weird moving castle thing I thought was kind of fun. This was a good storyline for him. And Traveler is Dasim Altor, and he is a follower of Hood, and what that all means. Again, I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours. I just thought all this was really interesting. I love this book. Then just kind of the epilogue, I think, what's her name? Picker, I think, goes and finds Karsa and says that he needs to go kill a god, which is crazy. I can't wait for that. And then Kaladin Brood breaks Dragonpour at the end and releases everyone within, and that's just kind of this whole, thematic thing that happens. Talk for hours and hours, but this is a great book. So, kind of concluding thoughts. I really loved the elements of storytelling in this book and how it just focused on these stories instead of going into a specific plot. And I was told that beforehand, and I didn't mind it at all, and I didn't really care that there wasn't a plot towards the end. And it's just a great idea of how to tell a story and explore these themes of grief, purpose, compassion, consequences of people's actions, and yeah, I love this book. Easy 5 out of 5 for me. I can't wait to read Desert Dreams, which I believe also doesn't have really a central plot too much. But I think Erikson just did a good job of stripping away these big, grand scale events and instead got to focus on the very personal and human aspects of a story. Really, from an ascendant trying to find purpose for his people to a child who was outcasted by his mother because of what, he means to his mom. And he's trying to, find purpose within his family, a new family, essentially. It just felt like a very grounded picture into just what felt very human. And that's what I loved about this book. And I think it found me at the right place in time. And yeah, easy 5 out of 5. I don't want to give it a rating, but this is probably my favorite Malazan book so far. I thought Dead House Gates and Memories of Ice couldn't really be usurped, but they were. So yeah, I highly recommend reading this series yet again. Yeah, just give it a shot. I loved it. Let me know your thoughts down below. Make sure to leave a comment. And yeah, just subscribe if you want and like this video. And I will talk to you soon.